Chapter 51, Part 2. And before we continue, I'd like you to, in your reading notes, try and see if you can summarize what you've learned so far about innate behaviors. Identify at least one proximate and one ultimate cause for the following: for the digger wasp burrow and prey behavior, for the egg rolling behavior in geese, and with the eyebrow raising to babies among humans. So pause before you go on and see if you can answer those questions. And if not, go back and review, because you need to be able to do these simple summaries of the section we've covered so far. The next thing that we're going to look at is innate behavior that is defined as directed movement. So there are two types, and we'll be looking at these two types when we do our animal behavior lab in class. But the first type of movement that's innate is taxis. And taxis is defined as a change in direction in the movement. And it's something that's automatic, movement toward, which would be a positive taxis, or away from a stimulus, and that would be a negative taxis. So, for example, we put on the type of stimulus that is being moved towards or away from at the front of the word of the portion that says taxis. So, for example, phototaxis would be moving towards or away from light, or chemotaxis would be moving toward or away from a chemical. Gravitaxis is, as you might imagine, gravity moving away or from the pull of gravity, or the feeling, the sensation of gravity. So the other type of direction is kinesis, which is simply a change in the rate of the movement. So moving either more quickly or more slowly in response to a stimulus. So these are considered something that is innate, something that an animal is born with. The ability to change the rate and response to a stimulus, or to change direction of movement in response to a stimulus. An example of this is that many stream fish, like trout, have positive what is called rheotaxis. That's R-H-E-O, taxis, from the Greek word rheos, which is the word for current, like the current in a river. So what that means is that fish automatically or innately swim or orient themselves in an upstream direction, so as in a positive taxis towards the current. And you could imagine what would be the ultimate causation of that behavior. If the fish is facing the direction of the current, its food is going to be brought towards it. Its ability to have its gills get the oxygenation that's needed is going to be increased. It also keeps the fish from being swept away and keeps them facing in, again, the direction that's going to help them see what's coming. Now, there are more complex innate behaviors. One of these is migration. Migration is defined as a regular long-distance change in location. And we can see that this is an innate behavior because even in birds that are bred and raised in captivity, there is a migratory restlessness that corresponds with the same birds found in the wild in terms of the timing or orientation. So basically, migration is a response to some sort of environmental stimulus that's going to provide a cue that the animals use to carry out migration. And again, this is considered an innate behavior that is passed down through genetics. The picture that you see here of these sandpipers, migration can occur over great distances, because these sandpipers migrate from their wintering grounds, which can be as far south as Peru, to their breeding grounds, which are in Alaska. So in the autumn, they make that trek back to their wintering grounds, and in the summer or spring, they return back to Alaska for breeding and raising of their young. This is a picture showing wildebeests doing migration. So populations of animals can navigate by different cues, and they're really still studying this to see how do those cues work? What is the proximate causation of these cues? What exactly is going on that causes this response to some sort of cue in the environment, triggering both the migration and also how it's going to occur, what is occurring, how do they navigate, how do they get to where they're going, how do they know how to get to where they're going. So that's why this is considered a more complex innate trait, because there are a lot of proximate questions that are still unanswered, and there are only hypotheses about what's actually causing this to occur. When it comes to ultimate causation, it's a little bit easier to see the benefits. Usually it's in response to either finding a better source of food or in finding a better, more protected place for either the production of offspring or the actual raising of those offspring in their first weeks or months. So some of the cues, like these wildebeests, are able to track their position relative to the sun. So the sun's position in relation to Earth changes throughout the day. So the animals can adjust for these changes by means of a circadian, which means a 24-hour clock that's innate in their nervous system. So there are controlled experiments that have been done playing with light and dark, and they find that the birds who migrate based on sunlight orient differently relative to where the sun is located at different times of the day. So then you could ask naturally, well, what about at night? Do they stop migrating, or what actually happens? And what they believe occurs is that some animals can orient themselves relative to the North Star, which has a constant position in the night sky. Next question that comes up is, what about clouds that obscure the sun and the stars? So another theory is that animals can track their position in relation to the Earth's magnetic field. And there are animals like pigeons and other animals that navigate without any solar or astral, which would be nighttime, cues. You would wonder, how do they detect the Earth's magnetic field in order to navigate long-distance movements? And what they have found is that some animals, particularly birds and fish, have a mineral called magnetite, which is a type of magnetic iron, in their skulls. And so the Earth's pull on this magnetite containing structures in their heads triggers the transmission of a nerve impulse to the brain. There's also some thought that the magnetic field has an effect on photoreceptors in the visual system, so that birds can orient themselves effectively in a magnetic field only when their environment contains some light of particular wavelengths. So these are all some hypotheses again. Basically what you need to know is maybe an example of one of these, and then be aware that there are a number of different cues that can initiate and also guide migration. Another complex animal behavior is imprinting, because imprinting is a combination of both innate and learned behavior. So imprinting is learning to form what's considered social attachment at a specific critical period. it has both learned and innate components, and the innate portion has a response to assigned stimulus. So the scientist Konrad Lorenz is famous for his study with ducklings or goslings. He has studied how if he was the first one that they saw when they hatched, that they would imprint on him and follow him as if he was their mother. And so you can see here, this would normally be what you would see is a line of the offspring following the mother. In this case, the first um, animal seen when these geese were hatched was Conrad, who then became the mother, and they would follow him just like these goslings are following their mom. So, approximate causation, explanation of what's going on, is during this early critical developmental stage, which in the case of geese is when they hatch. The young goose observes the mother moving away from them and calling. Obviously, an ultimate explanation or cause for this is that the geese that follow and imprint on their mother receive more care and they learn necessary skills, and they also have a better chance of survival if they're in a close proximity to their mother, an adult goose, as opposed to off on their own. A key part of this learned behavior, this imprinting, is that critical period. And so make sure you associate that phrase and that definition when you think of imprinting, because there's only a very specific sensitive phase for optimal imprinting. And if that phase is missed for whatever reason, imprinting does not occur. So most behavior actually has to be learned during a receptive time period. And an example of this is with the learning of songs among birds. So with the learning of songs from birds, there are critical periods, and actually there are a number of them with more complex songs. So there's the beginning portion where there is positive listening, and then there's another sensitive period. So that sensitive period where they actually hear it has to occur for this learning to occur. But then there's other steps that make this a more complex behavior that is actually a trial and error learning phase. To give you an idea of the sensitive period, for example, in seagulls, there is only a 1 to 2 day period where bonding can occur with the young and their adult gulls. If that doesn't occur in those first days, the parent will actually not care for the offspring. So again, stop it and process in your notes. Jot down a short couple sentences of what you've just learned. What are the key terms and concepts? Define and give an example of at least 3 types of innate behavior. You can pause this, but I'm going to go on. Because the next type of behavior is learned behavior. So we've talked about what's innate, what an animal is born with. But learned behavior is something that is going to actually, it can seem like it begins maybe even as innate, but it gets modified over time based on specific experiences. And that's what makes it a learned behavior. So there has to be a link between the experience and the behavior, which is different than a stimulus and a behavior. So there's been a lot of research into learning about what's happening in terms of nature versus nurture in shaping actual learning. For example, the spatial learning of a female digger wasp that uses landmark orientation. So that digger wasp example we looked at before, there had to be a specific distance between the